Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to once again be joined by the great Carter Burwell. And on today's episode, we will talk about his work with the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan, and of course, Carter's latest collaboration with director Joel Coen on the tragedy of Macbeth. It is my great pleasure to welcome back Carter Burwell.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you back on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. It's a pleasure once again. And Carter, I think Blood Simple was your big break as a composer and even your first score back in 1984, if I remember correctly. And this also marked the beginning of your collaboration with the Coen brothers and also their first big film or independent film, so to speak. And it turned into one of cinema's most well-known and finest collaborations between a composer and a team of directors. And how did it all begin back then? I understand you hadn't even considered a career as a composer. Am I correct?
That is correct. Yes. No, I was doing music as an avocation, meaning I had other forms of income, things I was pursuing, but during the day, and then at night, I'd go out and play in clubs in New York for fun. But I didn't really, think about it as a profession. And even when working on Blood Simple, I mean, they basically their sound editor, Skip Leavesay, who still works with them, he knew the music I was doing in these clubs, places like CBGB's, and he knew that they were looking for someone who could do this for basically no money, and he thought there was something about the music I made that might be appropriate to this film. I'm really not sure. It's interesting. It was clearly he had a good idea there, but you're right. I had never thought about it. And he asked if I would be interested, and I said yes. And met Joel and Ethan, saw a couple of reels of a very early cut of the film, and went home over the weekend, made some sketches for them because I didn't really have a reel of demo material to give them. I'd never done this before, but I made some sketches of different ideas. Some of them more like a traditional thriller, and some of them not so traditional. uh, Gave it to them, and then I didn't hear from them for months. I wasn't surprised, really, and I was off doing other things, and they caught up with me and told me that they wanted me to do the film. So we rather very quickly, really, sort of recorded variations on what I had already given them, and they did a lot of additional editing on the film. It kind of sat around for about a year before finally the festival started picking it up. And, they'd always told me, oh, this is probably never going to come out. Please don't get your hopes up. Please don't expect to ever be paid by us. And they're very honest about this sort of thing. But eventually it did get out. And then other people started calling me to see if I write music for their films. And then Raising Arizona came around. So yes, it developed without a real plan. It developed into a working relationship.
Great. And I just rewatched Blood Simple a couple of days ago, and it has this film noir or noirish feel to it. And what I love about the score is how you use the piano theme, which is used in the film a couple of times. And what always struck me about your work with the Coens is that it's never really wall to wall music. So it's never really, let's say, on the nose. So how do you communicate with them? How do you find, let's say, the proper tone, and how do you follow their lead, so to speak, as a composer?
Well, you're very right about the fact that it's not wall to wall music. I mean, I think unless you're in this business, you might not realize that there are some movies where the music begins at the beginning of the film and continues right till the end of the film.
Yes.
That is one way of doing it. Uh, we have never done that. And honestly, the films that we like, that Joel and Ethan and I all think of as the tradition in which we work, uh, is not done that way either. These are like a lot of the what we would consider the great directors like Hitchcock or Kurosawa. That they just don't. They use music when it can do the most, and are willing to have long stretches without it. And in fact, if you read a script by Joel and Ethan, you usually can kind of tell from the script where the music will be. It doesn't say music wells up here. Some people will write that into their scripts. They don't. But you can see that, oh, it's a page here with no dialogue. It's just a visual story. And I know now that that's for me. I can step in there. And then generally when there's dialogue going on, generally not playing music because we want our ears focused on the dialogue. And that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's generally true. Whereas there are a lot of other filmmakers who, as I say, basically are happy to have the music just play all the way through, all the time. When we do it, usually there is a reason. There's a pretty specific function that the music's there to serve, either dramatic or just cinematic, emotional. And that's right. And I'm going to lead this conversation a little here where I say that when we first started talking about Macbeth, that was one of my first questions for Joel, because William Shakespeare didn't write that way. He didn't have pages of visual storytelling, right? And I did ask, so where exactly are we putting the music in this film? Because it's dense with dialogue. And this was before I'd even seen it. I think maybe even before he'd even shot it. But it was a question, and we knew that it would be a big question, because it does fight the way we normally work, where we don't have dialogue and music playing at the same time that much.
Yes, and that's very interesting, Carter, because some films, I think, require a sort of wall-to-wall approach, be it thematic or be it just lots of synthesizers, but it's also interesting to talk about the spotting process as to when music is appropriate. Leave certain gaps, leave room for the audience to really understand the story and to absorb the dialogue, to really get into the story. And then you have maybe, out of 120 minutes of film, you have maybe 40 minutes of score. So I think at times it's less is more, and it may be more appropriate to really focus on certain areas of the film, right?
Well, it's true. Actually, if I'm going to mention a conversation I had with Spike Jonze when I worked on his first film, being John Malkovich. And Spike, he had done music videos, but that's a completely different thing, where you begin with the music and and the music plays all the way through typically, and then you create video for that. He was kind of learning about how you use music in a film, and there was a scene. He said, "Could we have music here?" And I argued, no, we can't have music here because we don't want people to know that this character is important. And if you suddenly have a note of music in this otherwise dry scene, this just what happens with score. It tells the audience. Doesn't even matter what the music is. The very fact that music started will tell the audience, oh, something's going on. Something, and we have to pay attention. Yes. And Spike didn't want anyone to pay attention to this particular character. And I said, no, so you can't have music. The entrance of music tells you something. Of course, if you have music play all through the film, it's not that way. And in that situation, taking the music out is a big moment. If you have music playing all through your film and then suddenly it stops, yes, that would be an example of what sometimes we call it negative scoring or negative spotting, to say, oh, well, let's stop the music here. But you're right. For people who don't know, they're usually one of the first real steps in a composer relationship with a director and working on a film is called the spotting session, where we begin at the beginning of the film and go through and make note of every place that music should start and stop, and more importantly, why? What's the purpose of it here? And it's an important thing. And it was with Macbeth, it was different because there are all these fantastic monologues that we all know, we've all studied in school, and do I want to play under those? What do I want to play? Because also the language is so complex to the modern ear that I don't want to distract. So the spotting of Macbeth was, yeah, it was interesting. It raised a lot of questions we don't normally face.
Yes. And I watched Macbeth for the first time a couple of days ago, and what struck me at first was the visual language of the film. And of course the language itself, which is of course also Elizabethan. And if somebody is not a, let's say, Shakespeare aficionado, it may be a bit demanding because I haven't watched or I haven't read or watched Shakespeare play in quite some time. So when I watched it, I was like, okay, I really need to get into this and wrap my head around the language and what they're saying and what they're trying to communicate, because it can be a challenge to really, let's say, understand everything that is going on visually and, of course, in terms of the language.
Yes, that's right. It is. And, Joel, of course, is such a great director that you could turn off the dialogue and you would still mostly know what was going on. Maybe the witch's prophecy, you wouldn't get that necessarily. But once the action is set in motion, which happens early in the story, I think you would completely understand what was happening. But yes, the dialogue, of course, is one of the features of any Shakespeare play, but particularly this one. There's so many monologues that are famous that we think of as just part of the English language.
Yes.
So you have to respect that, and if possible, help people to understand what's going on. Like they hopefully when the music is there, it's helping to push the story forward and explicate the story if there's anything that's at all unclear. But honestly, the way that Joel shoots and the way that these actors act, you
Yes.
can get it mostly from their faces. You don't need a lot of help. I have to say, music didn't have to help that much.
Yes. And there's a lot of dialogue and of course lots of monologue, and the acting is very good. Of course you have Denzel Washington, there's Frances McDormand. I would say all bases were covered basically. You have great cinematography, you have Joel, obviously, your music, and the film starts off in such an interesting way when you actually have the very first appearance of the witch, if I remember correctly, and then I think you scored it with the violin, right? So it was very, let's say, very poignant, very present, and which I liked a lot. And it was reused a couple of times throughout the film in different shapes, but that I think set the tone for the rest of the film.
That's right. There are versions of Macbeth in which you see the witches fairly often. You kind of sense that they're there and either observing or driving the story forward. And I think there Joel has written it such that the witches sort of are sometimes appear as birds. So that meant that in the script, he sometimes would have scenes and there'd be birds overhead, and you would make the visual connection to the witches. But in the end, a lot of that got cut out, that visual metaphor. And so, yes, it became very important for me to attach a musical sound to the witches right at the beginning, because you only see them, I think, one other time in the film. So to have that um, very, it's fairly unusual violin figure, have that uh, suggest the connection between that and the witches right at the opening of the film
Yes.
does help me as a composer. One of the things that we do is we use motifs to reference things that you can't see on screen. And I can reference that then again later on occasionally to suggest and remind us that of this supernatural aspect of the story and the prophecy that it kind of tells Macbeth his fate. One of the ways that we solved the problem of how to play score under dialogue was Joel and I came up with this idea that that often the dialogue is the melody and the score is the accompaniment to that melody. And so I wrote a lot of the score down in the cellos and the basses so low in pitch that it's not interfering with the speech. And I think that works very well. And also, of course, the darkness of that suits the story very well.
Yes.
But it does mean the score is, it's a lot of energy way down there. And then when the solo violin comes out and goes way up, up there with the birds.
Yes.
It is striking. There's nothing else like it. I think it's that's the only instrument that brings that kind of brightness to an otherwise very dark score for a very dark story. Part of the idea of that violin piece is that it would connote something like a fiddle to people, but it's not, it's not Scottish fiddle. Joel was very clear from our first conversation, this is not taking place in Scotland or any real place. So I wanted something though that would have that hard-edged, rough-hewn, inelegant, ageless quality that fiddle has, and these fiddle, we're familiar with fiddle traditions from, the British Isles or Scandinavia or the Balkans or, so many places, but we didn't want it to be any particular place. So I had to come up with something that spoke like a fiddle, but wasn't actually any normal fiddle style. And this wonderful player, Tim Fain, who performed, and he got the idea very well, but it's not easy to communicate to a musician, especially a classically trained musician. Well, this is what I want, but I don't want, there's 10 things I don't want it to be: Scottish, Appalachian, Scandinavian, blah, blah, blah. But all I want is it can't be any of those things, but let's make it, creepy and weird and distinctive. And anyway, he totally got it.
The finale of the film is a little more, let's say, action-oriented, quote-unquote action-oriented. There's the big fight at the end. And I know you don't necessarily score films, if any, which are action-oriented. And how did that kind of make you feel to kind of underscore a scene which features a battle of some sort? It's not over the top. It's just a fight at the end. But how did you approach that?
Well, you're right. It's not. That's a whole genre of film that I don't typically have a whole lot to do with. And I'd say I took it two ways. One is, the beginning of the film that you spoke about already is very slow. It's almost like the string section is just doing these slow waves in and out over which the violin part comes. But then the movie basically and the score speed up and speed up and speed up from the first murder on. It's like a mechanism, a machine that starts moving more and more quickly. And then once the English forces start marching on Macbeth's castle, then the music just becomes like, this is a battle. This is a movie about two armies. And the scene you're talking about now is basically the ultimate expression of that, which is where it's just one-on-one combat with Macbeth and Macduff. Macbeth having slaughtered all of Macduff's family, so we know that he has, he has as much anger as a person could possibly have in his heart. But that said, I did discuss with Joel, do we even need to score this scene? Because it's, in a way, two guys fighting with big metal, swords on a stone walkway. It's full of like kind of disturbing sounds just to begin with, the sound of metal against metal and metal hitting stone and all of that. There's a certain rawness that comes from that, but just for the sake of it, I did try scoring it, because I also thought another way of looking at it is if we can bring some of the thematic material to bear, the tunes, the chords that we've gotten to know from the story, that helps to make it this one fight ties up all of the threads basically,
Yes.
and in the end, that made sense. But I wrote it. I put metal into the orchestra. We've got well, pieces of all kinds of metal, not just like cymbals and things, but like
Yes.
big pots and things like that. The brakes from of drum of cars, things like that. A lot of metal and some strings and some brass, but yeah, it's an open question to me whether
Yes.
to even play things like that. I think that it works well. It does make it. You do get drawn in. The music helps to draw you in and get you on the edge of your seat to see who's going. One of them's going to make it, and one isn't, and it does help intensify all of that drama. I think, because so many people have come up to me and said how intense it was for them. So I think the
Yes.
music did. It was the right choice to do music there, and I think it did help. But yeah, and I'll just say, also that there is a technique to scoring action scenes, and although, as you say, not something I do that much, you have to set your tempo so that you hit all of the different hits, and like it's very much a craft, scoring action, and I had to dust off that that little bit of my craftsmanship.
I mean, you are right. It's a part of craftsmanship, and but in terms of making a movie or scoring a film, it's all basically based on craftsmanship. So basically, if one composer tends to gravitate towards action, it may be just as fulfilling for him or her as scoring a drama or a love relationship is to you. It's
No, that's
just
a really good point. That's right. I agree with you. And I didn't want to sound like it's just not my cup of tea, but that doesn't
yeah.
mean that it's a lesser cup of tea. You're quite right. That's absolutely true. And I think there are people, I think of so many of the films that Hans Zimmer's shop have scored, whether Hans or all the people who have
Hmm.
been his mentees and what have you, that they have come up with a way of doing it that, let's face it, it really works, and they've refined it, as an art, very highly.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the interesting aspect of scoring also, because some people may have a hard time underscoring a love scene, or let's say underscoring character based emotional music, and let's say action just comes more easy to them, or it's just their forte.
It's what I think it has a lot to do with just what interests you as just a film, as a member of the audience. Every composer is
Yes.
a member of the audience too, and we're one of the first
Yes.
members of the audience.
Absolutely.
And yeah, what interests me is, you're right, is the other stuff. Like I'm very interested in how can I bring some new thing here that you aren't seeing on screen. That's usually my motivation, and that's not the main thing that you're after in an action scene. Most, again, maybe I'm wrong because I'm not an expert, but I think in many times in
Yes.
action scenes, you're trying to amplify what you see on screen, and amplify it to the point where the audience can barely, they can't stand it. It's like, so the tension is so great and the excitement is so great. And what interests me is just a whole different set of questions.
Yes. Thank you very much. And of course, the film Tragedy of Macbeth was shot in black and white, and they used a more traditional aspect ratio. How do you tend to work when the film was shot in black and white? Does it, inspire you differently? Does it affect your way of scoring? Does it even matter to you in the first place, whether it's color or black and white? How does it feel to you?
Well, in this case, and I don't mean it's a generalization about black and white films, but in this case, maybe partly because of the story, which is sort of a blood soaked thriller. And maybe it's just also the aesthetics. It's a extremely aestheticized, black and white, like the camera angles and the way the faces fill the frame. It did. I have to say right off the bat, I couldn't help but think of Strings, because I couldn't help but think of Psycho. I couldn't help but think of, that I think that's also a beautiful film, and one in which the tightness of the camera is often used to make you uncomfortable, and where Bernard Herrmann's extraordinary string score just, is one of my favorites. So
Yes.
I did, just when I saw the first footage from Macbeth, I did think, I want to try strings, and that's just me free associating and think and call it, just called Macbeth to mind. It called Psycho to mind, and
Yes.
so I tried some strings, and I did feel like it really just fit the aesthetic. It just sounds like this film looks, and sent some examples of that to Joel, and he agreed. So the score mostly does land on strings. It's partly for that reason. I will also say it's partly because we were recording this during the pandemic, and string players can wear masks, and that immediately right there solved what would otherwise be a big problem. Now, in the end, when we recorded it, there were enough rules in place and vaccines were available that we also were able to do a small brass section, 6-piece brass section, which is great, because I think even a month earlier we would not have been able to do that. Brass, it's all about breath and spit, and it's
Yes.
not easy to do when there's a respiratory disease going around. But we were able to pull that off too, which was great. But yeah, strings were just also they're very attractive because they can wear masks.
Carter, needless to say, you and Joel and Ethan, you go back a long way. And does this long-term relationship and the deep connection which you share enable you to be more, let's say, straightforward and even critical of each other's work?
I'll put it this way: we all have a sense. We all share a sense of humor, which is usually it's not really obvious in Macbeth, but in every other film we've ever done, you can kind of see a sense of humor which helps to undercut like uncomfortable situations. Like in their films, when something horrible is happening, there's going to be a joke any minute now, and we use that in our working situations, where if something's not working or they are not happy with something I'm doing, or I'm not thrilled with something that we as a group are doing or whatever. And anyway, we generally get around it by forming it into a joke and laughing about it. So I'm not, every once in a while there'll be some situation where it's really difficult and we can't like solve it, and we have to sit back and say, okay, so, and we come against those things, where any production does, but not so many, I have to say. And because we're usually the three of us are all kind of trying to make the same film. A lot of times, in my experience, when I work on a project where there are real difficulties, it's because there isn't general agreement on what the film exactly is that we're doing. But in this case, they've written it, they've directed and produced it, they're cutting it, I'm writing and orchestrating it. There's really so few people involved that it's pretty easy for us to, and we all know each other so well that
Yes.
that just doesn't happen typically. We usually don't come up against those problems.
Great. And of course, Carter, don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to use the word critical as in, well, I didn't like what you were doing, just, do something else. Of course, in expressing criticism in a polite fashion and manner. And of course, there are filmmakers that say, well, here is what I want you to do. Just follow my lead, and please do not mess with my roadmap in any way. So that's what I was trying to bring across: the mutual trust and the ability to say, well, maybe we should go into a different direction. I like what you did, but maybe you can do something else.
Right. I understood what you meant, and I will say that on this film, I was never actually in the same room with Joel for the entire production. I didn't see him until the premiere of the film. Now, of course, we know each other very well, and we talk on the phone a lot. But this was due to the pandemic. He was on the West Coast, and I was on the East Coast. We just didn't see each other. We saw each other on Zoom, but it is hard with something as any creative endeavor, and I think particularly one that involves music, which is hard for people to talk about in the first place. It's sometimes hard for me to know exactly how he's feeling about stuff if I can't actually be in the room with him and see his face. It's that was a challenge. I think we got through it, but even when they were mixing the film, I couldn't be in the mixing room because the COVID rules allowed only 2 or 3 people in there at a time. But I'm just glad we were able to do it. But it was definitely that aspect of being able to talk back and forth creatively was challenging.
Carter, which collaboration with the Coens do you think elevated your game as a composer? If you look back on, let's say, 35 years of friendship, of collaboration, of filmmaking, which one stands out personally or professionally?
Well, I guess there are two for me. One is Miller's Crossing, because prior to that, I had never done any orchestral music of any sort in my life, know anything about it, and honestly, you wouldn't, they could have hired someone who did know. It would be easy for them at that point, having done Blood Simple and Raising Arizona, to just go and hire a composer, or John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith. They could have done that. And the fact that they chose to have me teach myself basically how to write orchestral music is such an odd decision on their part, but it changed. It definitely upped my game. That's right. I mean, while they were off shooting, I was learning what I could about the symphony orchestra and how to write for it, and it was great. I love learning new things. So it's amazing though that opportunity was even made available to me, because they knew perfectly well that I was a rock and roller and I didn't know anything about that. So there's that for that reason. I think in the end that the score came out really well too. So it doesn't suggest that I didn't know what I was doing. So I managed to hide that, and then the other would be Fargo, where I reached a certain point where I said, well, I want to start doing my own orchestrations and doing my own conducting. And again, in a way, I'm a late 20th century punk rocker who's slowly working his way backwards through the history of music and, learning how to write orchestral music and then how to orchestrate it and then how to conduct it. But Fargo was the first time that I did all those roles myself. And again, I think I'm very happy with that score in that movie. It's one of my favorites. So I think those are the two that stand out for me.
Great. And Miller's Crossing is one of my favorites too. And I remember watching a tape back then, many years ago, of Predator 2. And it was also released by Fox. And they had the trailer of Miller's Crossing on it. And I hadn't seen the film at that time. It's one of my favorite films of the Coens, and also one of the best trailers of also for their films. It also used your music, and it was just like a perfect calling card. It really made me want to see the film. Everything just really came together. So that was a great experience many years ago. And Fargo, I think it's also, I would put it in their top 5. It's always hard to quantify that and to let's say say, well, that's my top 10, that's my top 5. So it's subjective, but Fargo is really good. Fantastic main theme, great film, and just simply beautiful, and also very well shot by Roger Deakins. So
just, oh gosh,
yes, absolutely fantastic. And what also strikes me about the Coens is their ability to, let's say, shoot films which have a comedic side to them. The Big Lebowski, of course, for me, is a great film, but it's more a, let's say, comedy, quote unquote, when compared to, let's say, The Man Who Wasn't There, or Miller's Crossing, or Fargo. So there's a big variety going on, which I think also needs to be reflected by your talents as a composer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that, you know, putting aside Macbeth, which of course they didn't write, their films always, there's humor in all their films, even, No Country for Old Men, which of course is based
Yeah.
upon Cormac McCarthy's book, and there's nothing on the page that you would call funny, but the way that they shoot and the way that they choose to place characters in a scene
Yes.
can sometimes make this situation funny, or like Javier Bardem's haircut and No Country for Old Men. But they find a way to balance the darkness with a laugh, and that I love. I think it's personally it's my philosophy of life, and I think it runs through all of their films, that balance. And you're right, but there's a little bit of both in all their films, which I just love. And even though every film is different, like they try really hard not to repeat themselves, there are
Yes.
certain consistent themes about
Yes.
that. There's something that's both funny, but also there's pathos in people's efforts to try to find meaning in a meaningless world. It's both funny and also and sad, and their movies, and I think almost all of them are in some one way or another kind of about that.
There's always something to explore because let's say Burn After Reading is so much different, let's say, than True Grit, which is of course a different tone than Raising Arizona. So there is always something new and something to explore, either musically or in terms of their directorial efforts. So there's just a big variety, and they have a legacy, and of course you have a legacy as one of the greats of modern cinema, or of cinema of the past 30 years.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, I'm hoping to keep doing keep doing the music. Trying not to rest on my laurels, but it's yeah, no, it's been a fantastic collaboration. It really has. It's been yeah, I'm so fortunate to have had that experience. No question.
Right. Carter, thank you very much for taking so much time out of your schedule again for my show. And I really appreciate that. And I had a great time talking to you again. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I did. Thank you.
Great. I'm looking forward to chatting again down the road. And thanks again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great day.
Okay, you too. Same.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.